find a silencer.
Okay. Well, we're keeping up with time here. Guardians of the Aquifer, Mrs. Doyle is here. Oh, good morning.
Councillor, it's page 26 of the agenda is the officer's report.
Right. So, good morning and welcome. Good morning, Mrs. Doyle. 10 minutes, and I'll tell you when you've had 8 minutes if you wish us to ask you some questions along the way. So, but the time is yours, and welcome.
Commissioner, investigate the issue of fracking on the East Coast. Only 3 of you were sitting around this table last time I made a submission 2 years ago. Congratulations, you've got what you asked for. You might remember my submission was all about groundwater. Yes, I'm interested in fracking, but only to the extent that it means that there is the potential for contamination of our groundwater and the Hiratonga Plains aquifer in particular. It's thanks to you and your fellow councillors that we will have the best possible research available to guide this council forward. Part of the delay is because Dr. Wright found that in many cases in Taranaki, the oil companies were virtually self-regulating. I expect she will have something to say about regulations. Now, when she released her interim report in 2012, she told local reporters, "Some might say it's giving a tick of approval for fracking. It is certainly not what I am doing today." Hawke's Bay, Gisborne and Wairarapa differ from Taranaki. They have different geology. Rocks on East Coast are folded. It has different hydrology. The East Coast is also drier and therefore uses its aquifers more. It also has more seismic activity. Nothing's changed since then. We're still riding the junction of 2 tectonic plates which keep moving, and the droughts just remind us how dependent we are on the aquifers, and they will still need to frack. In June 2012, after hearing all the submissions on the long-term plan, and there were a lot of them, this was the decision. Hawke's Bay Regional Council acknowledges the risk around the practice of hydraulic fracturing. Should the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment's report include environmental effects that need addressing through the Regional Resource Management Plan, then we will undertake notifying the necessary plan changes. In November last year, Council staff recommended that the Ruataniwha Plains aquifer be excluded from mining. Yes. The report argued, quote, "We consider the Ruataniwha and Hiratonga Plains aquifers warrant a more precautionary approach. These are very important productive aquifer systems." Now, from my reading of that newspaper article, I assumed that thanks to your decision back in June 2012, the Hiratonga Plains aquifer had already been excluded, that our drinking water would be safe from any potential contamination, and that all the orchardists, the vegetable growers, the viticulturalists, etc., could carry on business as usual, knowing that you had made the commitment in June 2012 to, quote, "ensure all aspects of risk to soil, water and ecosystems are avoided, remedied or mitigated in each application for mineral exploration and extraction." Unfortunately, I discovered that all your good intentions had come to nothing. Back in 2012, the Regional Council had 5 months from that decision in June to November to find out how groundwater works and to request exclusion of any mining in the catchment area of the Hiratonga Plains aquifer. but nothing was done. The Ruataniwha Plains Aquifer was part of Block Offer 2014. The catchment for the Heritonga Plains Aquifer was part of Block Offer 2012. On the 2nd of November 2012, the national government signed off on the deal with Endeavour Energy. As a consequence of this failure to act in a timely manner, Hawke's Bay is left with an outdated regional resource management plan written before anyone even thought about mining and fracking. Where did it go wrong? On the 12th of March this year, Ian Maxwell, who's sitting up the back there, told me that the Endeavour Energy permit is nowhere near Heritonga Plains Aquifer, Pauline. And he gave me this map. Up here. You will see that permit number 53806 cuts straight through the middle of the Naruroro and Tutaikuri rivers back up in the hills. These two rivers feed into our aquifer down here on the Heritonga Plains. I emailed Ian to check that I had understood him correctly. His reply states, quote, "This permit area does exclude the Heritonga Plains Aquifer, inasmuch as it does not sit over the top of it, but as discussed, does have some catchments that feed into or contribute recharge to it included in it." If only he'd asked the Regional Council's principal groundwater scientist, Dougal Gordon. According to Dougal, the current understanding is that groundwater from this catchment area provides 75 to 80% of the recharge, which gradually finds its way down through the layers of groundwater all the way down to the aquifer lying beneath the Heritonga Plains underneath us here. This aquifer provides 100% of the town supply for the whole of Hastings District and Napier City. The horticulture industry on the plains is also totally dependent on this aquifer for clean irrigation water. That is the reason Hawke's Bay Fruit Growers Association supported the petition back in 2012 for the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment to investigate the risks of fracking in this region. 6 weeks ago, I attended a meeting convened by Ian Maxwell for an update on oil and gas development in Hawke's Bay. In March, the Ministry for the Environment had released new guidelines managing environmental effects of onshore drilling. These guidelines note that it is possible that, quote, and this is important, the migration of fracturing fluid through pathways could affect water supplies, unquote, depending on the nature of the underlying geology. While the situation on its own would not trigger the 2008 National Environment Standards for Sources of Human Drinking Water, quote, the risk of this occurring needs to be assessed in any application for hydraulic fracturing. Why? Because fracking will blast open those pathways and create the potential for leaching into our drinking water. Dr. Kyle Bland, GNS geologist, spoke at the excellent oil and gas symposium organised last year by Hastings District Council. He acknowledged concerns about leaching into groundwater, and he confirmed something I'd already heard from Professor Peter Malin, who teaches fracking at Auckland University Engineering School. Quote, scientists still do not understand the connectivity between layers of groundwater and other layers within the substrata, unquote. Ian Maxwell told us that the Ministry for the Environment used the Regional Council, quote, as a sounding board to develop best practice guidelines. He seemed concerned, however, that the guidelines require regional councils to provide the completion certificate on well casings. If oil and gas exploration goes ahead in Hawke's Bay,
2 minutes, Mrs. Doyle.
Liability for well casing failure would rest with the Regional Council. He acknowledged that the biggest risk is not surface spills, but cross-contamination below the surface. The staff seem to have been totally focused on the surface and ignoring what's going on below the surface. Perhaps this is why Hawke's Bay Regional Council missed the chance to protect the catchment area of the Heritonga Plains Aquifer. They just weren't looking. Instead, they were looking to, quote, develop capacity regarding oil and gas exploration. That same article that alerted me to the exclusion zones alerted me to that activity within Hawke's Bay Regional Council over the last few years. I'm not sure this is an appropriate role for Hawke's Bay Regional Council. This sounds like HBRC. The Regional Council's role is to protect what we already have here, and especially to protect our water supply. I'll let you read for yourself what I've written further there. I want to go on to the recommendations, and there are 7. Number 1, that the Council acknowledge that the catchment area of the Hiratonga Plains Aquifer should have been treated the same as the Ruataniwha Aquifer and excluded from mining. Number 2, that the Council acknowledges that the plan change to the Regional Resource Management Plan will take time, but such a plan change will be given high priority. 3, that the Council acknowledge that the Hiratonga Plains Aquifer warrants a more precautionary approach, to quote the Council staff report back in November, and accordingly the Council will ensure all aspects of risk to the catchment area are avoided. Number 4, all applications for exploratory mining or other oil and gas mining are to be publicly notified. Number 5, the authority previously delegated to Council staff with regard to exploratory mining or other oil and gas mining is hereby revoked. Number 6, that full Council authority is to be reinstated for the processing of RMA applications for such mining. And number 7, the proposal for a so-called stakeholders group be scrapped. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs.
for letting
Doyle.
me go slightly over time.
You're welcome, and thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
No,
or are we out of time?
you're out of time.
Hopefully, what I've told you answers.
This is
any
very
questions
useful,
that you
this
might
document, anyway, for us to refer back to. So thank you. Right, where are we now? Don't frack the bay, Mr. Chris Perley. And welcome to you, sir.
Welcome to you, sir.
In situ. I think he looks fabulous. He's not going to disrobe or anything, is he? Or? He's not going to disrobe or anything. We'll go on then very quickly. Mr.
Well,
Perley.
I'll just keep speaking. Thanks very much for the opportunity, and nice to see you all, councillors. I'm with Don't Frack the Bay. You know about us, so I'm not going to get into that. I'm here to talk about 3 issues. The first is the role of the council in terms of we're more than just regulatory. We need to be strategic. The second thing is that we need to have a strategic framework as a matter of urgency for oil and gas. And the third thing that I want to push is that any consultation that is done by the council needs to have a serious rethink in terms of its approach. And it needs to actually be open, and it needs to understand that knowledge is not held in the room or at the top of the room. It's held throughout. And it also has to include that knowledge, also the value systems that we hold, because you are here to talk to the people of Hawke's Bay to find out where we want to be in the future for our kids and our kids' kids. And it's not about a short-term financial organisation that is going to make money and leave. So we are the ones that should be key to any consultation process, not somebody with a short-term financial interest. I want to submit that I'll just read one of the paragraphs, that our councils are actually the voice of not only our current generations but all of the future generations that could be put at risk. And the difference between the councils and corporations is that these commercial interests, you would argue, or you could argue, have actually almost no concern even for current generations. And that disturbs me, and it disturbs a lot of people, and we don't trust them. And we want to trust our democratically elected people to stand on and for our interests. I won't go on much more about that because I would rather have questions than talk about this sort of things. So that's the reason why we submit that we need to start consulting and developing a strategy on oil and gas, because if we don't, and it's just a regulatory framework that comes in, then the potential is there that we could always have nice little wells, and we've checked them all, and all the resource consents have been ticked, and the compliance people have gone out and they've made sure the well casing's done, but that's not the point. The point is the question about whether we ought to and where we ought to is what has to be developed first. The idea that we can wait until the 2015 LTP is a nonsense. All this stuff is happening now. That's why the urgency around the PTE. So the staff report, which we're not overly happy with, because it was just a cascade of cliches, if you like, with no real thought about what the urgency was about oil and gas. And they tried to claim, we'll just wait for the LTP, and we've got a great stakeholder process in place. Well, number one, you can't wait to the LTP, and number two, you haven't got a great stakeholder process in place. And there's a track record of stakeholder process that needs to be. This is the elephant in the room within this council, and I'll just lay that on the table as well. I want to talk about Warren Buffett for a very short time. Warren Buffett, as all of you know, is rather wealthy, and one of his central tenets is first, don't lose. He's not one of these flash Harry property developers, short-term here, wheeler-dealer types. I know that they run the country, but the point is that he understands that that's the first premise. You don't lose. It's called a min-min strategy. We have the potential to lose enormously because this aquifer is at risk, not just by drilling within or near the aquifer, incidentally. And so we have to take his approach because we are a council that's here for our people and for the land in the long term. That's the first. That's the first two. We need to be strategic, not regulatory. And the fact that there isn't a reference in the draft annual plan to policy development or any allocation of costs is a serious oversight, and we'd like to see that rectified. So that's what we want to see. And I've spoken about the rest, so I'll just say the last thing that we really need to look at is that we submit that there be a specific reference made in the annual plan to the development of a strategy on oil and gas with open public consultation that is not controlled by developers, and that's essential, and that sufficient budget is provided for genuine consultation. We're not saying what the answers will be. We're saying that this is a desperately and urgent need, and it needs to have a proper process around it. And I'll stop right there.
Thank you. Okay, questions. Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, hi Chris. Thanks for your submission. You're aware that the
PCE, yes,
report from the Commissioner for the Environment is coming out today. Do you have a proposal for us as to how we might utilise that report and engage with the public on it and incorporate it into our own plans?
I'd like to see the specifics of the report beforehand. I hope that they take into cognizance just what's happening on the East Coast in terms of our geology and our the particular land and issues that we face, aquifers and things like that. But so I would certainly like to see whatever is there. We need to still maintain a regional perspective on what comes out. So if there are blanket statements about safety in Taranaki or whatever, then the important thing is that we don't assume that means that it applies here. So, but I think that this is a critical document, and I think that we need to take cognizance of it. Any strategy development has to include it. Yes, it has to include the material and the work that they've done.
Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Scott?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Perley. Nice to see you here.
Nice to see you.
You object to stakeholder-style consultation, and you prefer what you've called open public consultation. I think you used the term genuine. How do you get the ordinary person engaged in that? Or do we, by public consultation, listen to the outspoken public?
I think it's a really good point. There are processes in place. There are processes by which you can engage people. I think that the problem we have is that we take a proposal to them and then we ask for submissions and we prepare a document. I went to one a week or so back. So we prepare a particular thesis and then ask for feedback, whereas I think it's much better if you go out there and say, we have this issue, what do you think? So you have an open question instead of a set range of options or just one option to get consideration on, because it's like the steamroller, the super tanker is already up at 30 knots by then, and what we need to do is set direction early. So you have to go out and talk to, I think, important people to talk to about being open about ideas. That's really important. And then, but the process, and if you talk, I've referred to Einstein's ladder in this very room, about at one end you have completely almost anarchic Aristotelian, Athenian democracy where you're all in a forum, and at the other end it's just tokenism. It's just it's a box ticking exercise of here's the option, here's our spin. What do you think? We'll ignore your submissions. And our fear is that we're going to be much closer to that end. So if we are to get to the other end, then it requires you to have no answers when you go into the public. You sit there and you're basically asking questions and trying to get information about issues and values. and then you set up a process of public meetings that actually are framed that way. That's my way, that's my belief.
You then support what has been done in some of the council checks. I'm sorry, I can't think of the term, but when we do our satisfaction survey of the public, a randomised survey with open-ended questions. Would that be your approach?
No, I think, I'm sorry, Councillor. No, I think face-to-face, I think in a room is much more effective than
yeah, I'm trying to find how do we get the genuine public engagement, not just a fraction of public engagement.
Oh, I think that's a good point as well. This is the thing about not just having one particular tactic, and one tactic is to have a genuine open meeting sort of situation. The other one is to make sure there's publicity about these things, and perhaps a third could be a direct mail or something like that. So I'd be very open. I wasn't here to talk about the details because I think that's something that needs to be thrashed out by experts about how you actually, and I can't claim that I'm an expert in terms of what we could do to actually really get engagement. But the first thing, if you look at all the theory, is you develop trust in your people. The people have to trust you, and then when they trust you, things happen. So the actions by councils that develop trust are actually very much part of this process as well.
Minute and a half left. Any further questions? Councillor Hewitt?
I'd just like to say thank you, Chris. It's really nice to see you here and congratulate you on a presentation that plays the issue, not the man. It's it endears credibility with the presenter and certainly empathy around the council table. So I've enjoyed listening to what you've got to say. Thank you.
I never play the man.
And you're going to hammer him with a big question now, Councillor Hewitt? No? Are there any other questions? Excuse me. Any other final comments from you, Mr. Perley? And it is good to see you here.
I believe Hawke's Bay is a brilliant place, and I think we can have an amazing future. And I like many of the people in this room, and I think there are positive ways forward, and if we just learn to talk with each other, that's my only.
Well, thank you. Right. Okay.